The room did not erupt when the executors revealed the truth. It went silent. Princess Anne, long seen as the iron guardian of Queen Elizabeth's private wishes, sat motionless as a sealed codicil was placed before the family. Then came the sentence no one expected. Elizabeth had named Princess Charlotte. In that instant, loyalty, legacy, and succession collided behind closed palace doors. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Anne kept her hands still, but the control on her face began to crack. The executor had not spoken with drama. He did not need to. The Codicil, a written addition to a will that changes or adds final instructions, had done the damage by itself. It stated that Charlotte, not Anne, would inherit a protected symbolic royal legacy tied to the Queen's personal authority. That meant more than an object, more than a private keepsake, more than a line in a family file. It meant Elizabeth had chosen where part of her spirit would travel next. William felt the room shift around him. Pride touched him first, sharp and unexpected, because his daughter's name had been placed in the heart of the Queen's final wishes. Then discomfort followed, heavier and colder. Charlotte had not asked for this. The young princess had not entered the room, had not touched the document, had not claimed a thing. Yet her name now stood between Anne's lifetime of duty and Elizabeth's final private command. Charles said nothing. The king stared at the paper as though silence could slow the meaning of it. He understood why this mattered. Elizabeth's private legacy carried emotional authority inside the family, the kind no crown ceremony could create and no public title could replace. By naming Charlotte, the monarch had moved a piece of royal trust past her own children and toward the generation that would live with the consequences. Catherine watched Anne carefully. The Princess of Wales could see the wound before anyone named it. Anne had spent decades proving she could carry burdens without complaint, and now the very mother she had served had placed the final symbolic burden somewhere else. The older royal did not look angry at Charlotte. That made the moment worse. She looked hurt by Elizabeth. The executor set the file down. The sound was small, but everyone heard it. Anne finally looked from the paper to William, and the first fracture opened. If Elizabeth herself had named Charlotte, then Anne had only two choices: defend the Queen's will, or fight the pain of being passed over. But before Anne could accept what had been read, the room had to face the people whose lives had just been rearranged by one private line from Elizabeth's hand. This was not simply a legal revelation. It was a family wound opened in front of witnesses. Anne had spent decades serving without complaint. William had carried the future on his shoulders. Catherine had protected Charlotte from the sharpest edges of royal life. Charles had spent a lifetime waiting to rule. Now one codicil forced them all to measure love against duty. Anne did not move at first, but everyone could feel the shock settle around her. She had always been the daughter who understood Elizabeth without needing long explanations, the one who treated service not as a performance, but as a debt paid every day. Duty had shaped her life. It had taken her comfort, softened very little, and rewarded her with respect rather than warmth. Yet now, in a room full of people who knew exactly what that service had cost, she was being told that the Queen's private legacy had moved past her. Charlotte's name carried a different kind of weight. She was still young, still protected by William and Catherine from the full force of palace expectation, but the codicil had changed what her name meant inside the family. It was no longer only the name of a child loved by her parents. It had become a symbol, a codicil, a written addition to a will that changes final instructions, had placed her at the center of Elizabeth's private vision for the future. That mattered, because royal legacy is never just about inheritance. It is about who is trusted to carry meaning when the old world begins to fade. Anne gripped the arm of her chair as the executor explained that Elizabeth's choice had been deliberate and private. The executor spoke with careful calm, but each word landed like a verdict. The Queen had not made the decision in confusion, pressure, or haste. She had chosen Charlotte with intention. Anne heard that clearly, and the pain deepened because intention left no room for excuse. Elizabeth had known what this would mean to her daughter, and she had written it anyway. Catherine leaned closer to William, not in fear for herself, but in protection of Charlotte. She understood instantly that her daughter's innocence had entered a room filled with old wounds, quiet rivalries, and family history too heavy for any child to carry. William looked toward the executors and asked the question no one else had dared to form. Did Charlotte's role begin now, or was it only meant as future protection? His voice stayed controlled, but the fear beneath it was clear. He was not asking as a prince, he was asking as a father. Charles listened with a sadness he could not hide. The king understood that Elizabeth had been thinking beyond his reign, beyond his authority, and beyond the fragile peace of the present. She had looked toward the next generation's moral inheritance. And then Anne finally spoke, her voice low but devastating. If Elizabeth trusted her so deeply in life, why was she never told? That question pulled the family backward, toward the hidden moment that made Elizabeth put Charlotte's name where Anne never expected to see it. Every royal rupture has a beginning, but this one began quietly. Not in a scandal, not in a balcony appearance, not in a public statement, but during a private Windsor chapel rehearsal, months before Elizabeth's final decline. A small exchange, almost invisible at the time, became the trigger that changed everything. Elizabeth saw Charlotte differently that day, and Anne never knew. Anne had been searching for an answer, and now the family had to return to the moment Elizabeth never forgot. Windsor Chapel, a sacred royal setting used for private worship and ceremonial preparation, had always carried more than religious meaning inside the family. It was where tradition felt close enough to touch. It was where silence could feel heavier than speech. That day, the rehearsal was meant to be routine, another careful run-through of royal order, movement, and duty. Anne treated it that way because she believed precision protected the crown. Charlotte stood nearby, young enough to be shielded from the burden around her, yet alert enough to sense that Elizabeth's personal emblems mattered. Those emblems, small ceremonial objects connected to the monarch's authority and memory, were not ordinary possessions. They represented service, continuity, and the quiet promise that one reign would not vanish when another began. When an aide nearly dropped the cushion carrying one of them, the room tightened. Before anyone could fully react, Charlotte stepped forward and steadied it. Elizabeth noticed everything. The Queen did not praise the child loudly. She did not turn the moment into a lesson. But later, in a documented private account given to one trusted executor, she described Charlotte's action as instinctive calm, not entitlement. That detail mattered. The monarch had spent her life watching people reach for status, attention, and influence. In Charlotte, she saw something different. A child had protected what mattered, without asking what it was worth. Anne had been there, but Anne had been focused on the rules. She corrected a protocol detail, checked the order of movement, and made sure the rehearsal did not slip into disorder. That was her strength. It was also the tragedy of the moment. While Anne guarded the structure, Elizabeth was watching the future. While the daughter protected duty through discipline, the grandmother saw duty appear naturally in Charlotte's small, steady choice. William remembered another detail that made the moment impossible to dismiss. Later, Charlotte asked whether Gangan's things must always be protected. The question was innocent, but it cut deep because it carried no ambition. Elizabeth heard in it a kind of loyalty untouched by rivalry. From that day forward, the Codicil began to form in her mind. She did not stop trusting Anne. She chose Charlotte because she wanted the legacy to move beyond old wounds. And once Anne understood that the decision had begun in a chapel she had stood inside, the confrontation could no longer be avoided. Anne did not raise her voice at first. That made the moment more dangerous. She looked at William across the polished table, not as a nephew, not as the future king, but as the father of the child named in Elizabeth's codicil. Her words were measured, but every syllable carried years of service, disappointment, and one unbearable question. Did he know? Anne waited until the executors withdrew before she spoke again. The closed door changed the air in the room, because now there were no legal voices to soften the damage, no official phrases to hide behind, and no witnesses who could turn pain into procedure. William remained still, but the prince understood that his aunt was no longer asking about paper. She was asking whether blood had quietly moved against her. Anne fixed her eyes on him and asked if he had known Charlotte's name was inside the codicil before the executors exposed it. A codicil, the written edition that can alter the final wishes attached to a will, had already changed the emotional balance of the family. Now the question became sharper. If William had known, then Anne had been left outside a truth everyone else had been allowed to protect. If he had not known, then Elizabeth had hidden the decision from all of them. William chose every word carefully. He told Anne he had not requested it, had not influenced it, and would never have used Charlotte to diminish the woman who had served the Queen with such ruthless devotion. The answer should have eased the room. It did not. His calm only made Anne's pain harder to place. She could not accuse him of betrayal, but she could not escape the fact that his daughter's name had replaced the role she believed her mother had saved for her. Catherine stepped in with a softness that still carried strength. She reminded Anne that Charlotte had no voice in this decision, no ambition inside it, and no understanding of the old wounds her name had reopened. The Princess of Wales was not defending power. She was defending a child. William heard that, and his face tightened, because Catherine had spoken the truth he feared most. Charlotte had been pulled into history before she could even understand the cost. Charles finally broke his silence. The king placed his hand flat on the table and admitted that Elizabeth had often made her deepest decisions alone, not because she lacked love, but because she believed duty became weaker when it asked permission. That confession struck Anne harder than anger would have. Her mother had trusted her, yes, but the monarch had still kept this final choice hidden. Anne leaned back, wounded but controlled, and said that if Elizabeth chose Charlotte, then someone must explain what power the codicil actually gives her. That demand moved the drama from personal hurt to palace power, where the true meaning of the codicil was waiting to be exposed. The second reading was colder than the first. This time, the executors did not speak of love, memory, or family. They spoke of control. Anne sat straighter as the legal meaning became clear. Charlotte had not merely been named for sentiment. Elizabeth had placed a future royal symbol, beyond interference, beyond rivalry, and beyond the reach of anyone who might reshape it. Anne felt the room tighten again, but this time the wound was sharper, because the language had changed. The first reading had hurt her heart. The second challenged her place. The executor explained that Charlotte's inheritance was protected by conditions, meaning no senior royal could redirect it, sell it, display it, lend it, or use it for public advantage before the appointed time. That mattered, because royal symbols do not only carry beauty, they carry authority, memory, and silent power inside the family. William heard his own name next, and the burden shifted toward him. The prince had been named temporary guardian of the codicil's terms until Charlotte reached the age Elizabeth had specified. A guardian, in this private sense, meant the person responsible for protecting the Queen's final instructions without changing them. William did not look triumphant. He looked trapped between honor and guilt, because every new word protecting Charlotte also deepened the hurt sitting across from him in Anne. Anne watched the lead executor slide a second page across the table, but she did not touch it for several seconds. That refusal said what pride would not allow her to say aloud. Elizabeth had praised her lifetime of duty in the codicil, had described her as steadfast, disciplined, and loyal beyond measure. Yet praise without control felt like a ceremonial medal placed over a fresh wound. The Queen had honored Anne, but she had not handed her the key. Charles absorbed the blow with quiet sadness. The king understood that his mother had bypassed even the reigning monarch's emotional authority over this private legacy. That mattered, because his crown gave him public power, but Elizabeth's handwriting still held a different kind of command inside the family. Charles had waited a lifetime to rule. Yet in this room, he was reminded that a son can inherit a throne and still be overruled by a mother's final judgment. Catherine broke the silence with the question William feared. Did Charlotte have to be told immediately? The executor answered no. Elizabeth had designed the arrangement as protection, not spectacle. Catherine breathed through the relief. But the relief did not erase the fear. Charlotte could remain innocent for now, yet her name had already changed the adults around her. Then the silence grew heavier for another reason. Camilla's name had not appeared. Not in the inheritance, not in the guardianship, not in the protective language. Everyone noticed, but no one wanted to speak first. Anne looked at Charles. William looked down. Catherine stayed still. The absence became its own revelation, colder than any sentence on the page. And when that silence finally settled over the room, the fallout began, before anyone had even left the table. Anne had survived public storms, family scandals, private grief, and decades of relentless duty. But this wound was different, because it came wrapped in Elizabeth's handwriting. When the meeting ended, she did not argue. She rose, pushed her chair back with a scrape that made everyone look up, and walked toward the door carrying the pain of obedience. Anne moved with the same discipline that had defined her life, but the room understood that discipline was no longer strength alone. It had become armor. The decision had done more than disappoint her. It had formally removed the role she believed was waiting for her, chief guardian of Elizabeth's private legacy. That role meant being the main protector of a personal royal trust, the person expected to control access, preserve meaning, and defend the Queen's final wishes from pressure. Now that responsibility had passed to William, who would protect the terms for Charlotte until the appointed time. William watched Anne leave, and felt the victory curdle into guilt. Nothing about this felt like triumph. His daughter had been lifted into Elizabeth's final design, but that elevation had wounded a woman he respected deeply. The prince knew Anne had given the crown what few others could: loyalty without theater, service without self-pity, endurance without applause. Now Charlotte's name had become the reason Anne walked out of the room without farewell, and that knowledge sat heavily on him. Charles remained seated after the others began to move. The king looked at the empty chair Anne had left behind, and for the first time, the codicil felt less like a document and more like a crack running through the family table. Palace aides were instructed within hours to update the access rules around the protected legacy. That mattered because access was power. Whoever could open, review, move, or approve the handling of Elizabeth's private symbol controlled more than an item. They controlled the story of what the monarch wanted preserved. Catherine stayed close to William, but her concern had already moved beyond the adults. She told him quietly that Charlotte must never feel responsible for the hurt surrounding her name. The Princess of Wales understood the danger immediately. A child could inherit a symbol without understanding the pain attached to it, but the adults around her could turn that symbol into a burden. William agreed, yet his silence revealed the fear he could not fully say. Protecting Charlotte now meant protecting her not only from public pressure, but from private family wounds. Anne paused at the door before she disappeared from the room. She looked once at the sealed folder, and that single glance carried everything she refused to speak. Hurt, loyalty, disbelief, restraint. Then she left without saying goodbye. But the matter did not end there. Later, through a handwritten request delivered by a senior aide, Anne asked for a private meeting with William. Not as a royal official, not as a rival guardian, as an aunt who needed the truth face to face. That private meeting would change the tone of the entire crisis, because for the first time, Anne and William spoke without documents between them. The most important conversation did not happen in the meeting room. It happened later, behind a closed door, with no executors, no aides, and no ceremonial language. Anne stood by the window, still carrying the shock. William entered slowly, not as the future king, but as a nephew asking for understanding. What followed turned anger into something more painful: acceptance. Anne did not turn immediately when William came in. She needed those few seconds, because control had always been her refuge, and this time, Control felt almost impossible to hold. The smaller sitting room removed every layer that had protected them before. No official language, no sealed papers, no executor explaining what Elizabeth meant. Only two people bound by blood, duty, and a wound neither of them had chosen. William understood that this meeting was not about winning. It was about surviving the truth without breaking the family further. Anne spoke first, and her honesty changed the room. She admitted that being passed over had hurt, because Elizabeth's trust had been one of the few things she had never questioned. The Queen had relied on her discipline for decades, and Anne had carried that reliance like a sacred burden. That mattered because her service had not been built on reward. It had been built on certainty. She believed her mother knew she would protect anything placed in her hands. Now, the Codicil had told her that Elizabeth trusted her deeply, but still chose someone else. William listened without interruption. The prince knew Anne did not need defense from him. She needed respect. He told her Charlotte would need her guidance one day, not because the Codicil demanded it, but because Elizabeth's values lived most clearly through Anne. A Codicil, the written edition that changes final instructions in a will, had named Charlotte as the future keeper of the symbol, but it had not given the young princess the wisdom to understand it. That wisdom, William said, could only come from someone who had lived duty without turning it into theater. Anne's expression shifted when he said that. Not softened completely, not healed, but altered. William told her Charlotte should inherit the symbol, while Anne must help her understand the weight behind it. The sentence reached the place anger could not reach. Anne turned away, wiped one tear quickly, and regained herself before he could speak. That single tear said what pride would never allow. She had not wanted power for vanity. She had wanted proof that her mother had seen her. William promised that Charlotte's role would never be used to humiliate Anne or erase her service. He would protect his daughter, but he would also protect his aunt's dignity. Anne accepted slowly, not with joy, but with the hard grace of someone choosing duty over hurt. One more time. She agreed to stand beside Charlotte when the time came, but only if the palace told the story truthfully. That promise shaped how the palace prepared for the public storm, because once the Codicil leaked beyond the walls, the world demanded a meaning. By morning, the private wound had become a national spectacle. The palace gates were no longer just gates. They were the edge of a story everyone wanted to enter. Charlotte's name appeared where no child's name should have been forced to stand, across headlines, broadcasts, and public debate. Yet one image captured it all better than any official statement. Anne saw the headline before she heard the commentary. A major London newspaper had placed Charlotte's photograph beside the words, "Elizabeth's last trust, Charlotte named." The phrase landed with brutal simplicity. It turned a family decision into a national symbol and changed private pain into public meaning. For Anne, that mattered, because the world was no longer discussing Elizabeth's judgment alone. It was now discussing her absence from it. Every line praising Charlotte carried, beneath it, a quiet question about the daughter who had served longest and been chosen differently. William understood the danger at once. Broadcasters called the Codicil a generational shift, a dramatic transfer of symbolic trust from the old guard to the young future of the monarchy. A Codicil, the written addition to a will that changes final wishes, had become the word of the morning. Commentators repeated it with fascination, but the prince heard something else beneath their excitement. They were turning Charlotte into an idea before she had the age to understand it. They were turning Anne into a wound before she had the privacy to heal. Catherine moved with quiet purpose through the morning. She sat with Charlotte at breakfast and kept the conversation gentle, ordinary, protected. The young princess did not need to know that her name had become a headline. She did not need to feel adults measuring her against Anne, Elizabeth, or the crown. Catherine understood why this moment mattered so deeply. Innocence can be changed by attention, and once the public decides a child represents the future, childhood itself becomes harder to defend. Anne watched the coverage privately, and the exposure cut deeper than anger. She was not furious at Charlotte, That would have been easier for outsiders to understand. But it was not true. She was saddened because her own hurt had become a public interpretation, flattened into rivalry and framed as defeat. Outside Buckingham Palace, a small crowd gathered, leaving flowers and handwritten notes. Some praised Anne's lifetime of service. Others called Charlotte the future of grace. The contrast was unbearable. One woman honored for sacrifice. One child praised for promise. William turned off the television mid-segment when a commentator began speaking too aggressively about Charlotte's rise. The room fell quiet, but the silence was not empty. It was protective. It was a warning. Catherine looked at him and understood that the palace could not let the story harden into a battle between Anne and Charlotte. So behind closed doors, a final internal statement began to take shape. It would define the Codicil not as a rejection of Anne, but as Elizabeth's bridge between generations. And with that final framing, the monarchy reached its verdict, not in law alone, but in the emotional truth Elizabeth left behind. In the end, the Codicil did not destroy Anne. It revealed the cost of being trusted for too long without being spared pain. Elizabeth had not abandoned her daughter. She had asked something harder of her: to let the future pass through Charlotte while still carrying the old standard herself. That was the final truth, and it changed the family forever. Anne understood, at last, that the wound was not rejection. It was responsibility in its harshest form. The Codicil, a written addition to a will that changes or adds final instructions, had named Charlotte as the future keeper of a symbolic royal legacy, but it had also left Anne with something no document could fully describe. Elizabeth had preserved her daughter as the living model of duty. The Queen had not erased her sacrifice. She had used it as the measure by which Charlotte would one day understand what service truly costs. Charlotte's name no longer sounded like a prize inside the family. It sounded like a burden waiting in silence. William knew that better than anyone. The prince had first felt guilt because his daughter's elevation had hurt Anne. But now he understood the deeper truth. Charlotte had been chosen not for triumph, but for renewal. Elizabeth had looked beyond old scars, beyond adult rivalries, beyond the bruised pride of those who had carried the crown for decades, and placed hope where bitterness had not yet reached. Catherine held to one conclusion with quiet force. Charlotte would be protected first as a child, then guided slowly into the meaning Elizabeth had left for her. The Princess of Wales knew why that mattered. Royal inheritance could harden a young heart if it arrived too early, and public expectation could steal innocence before anyone noticed. Catherine would not allow Charlotte to become a symbol before she remained a daughter. She would let the future come, but not at the cost of childhood. Charles received the lesson with humility he could not hide. The king had inherited the throne, but even he remained a son, shaped by choices his mother made beyond his reach. Elizabeth's final act reminded him that power and understanding are not always the same thing. He could command ceremonies, schedules, and public order, but the monarch before him had still held the deepest emotional authority over the family's private soul. Charles accepted that truth with pain, because accepting it was the only way to honor her. Anne placed her hand on the sealed codicil box one final time. She did not touch it to claim it. She touched it to acknowledge Elizabeth's will before stepping back. In that moment, her shock became sacrifice. William's guilt became guardianship. Charlotte's name became renewal. And the Queen's final act became a bridge between service and tomorrow. The Codicil closed one chapter of royal certainty, but it did so with a final message. The crown survives not because pain is avoided, but because duty learns how to pass itself on. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.